Hi, everybody. I am going to go over the abstract watercolor card that we're going to work on. And really, this is an experiment. So we are embracing the watercolor path. We don't know where we're going to end up with this. It is much like our shaded chiaroscuro tangled sketchbook that we did. I like this format because we can explore technique without getting really hung up with trying to make stuff look like things, right? I think sometimes it's just nice to know what the material can do. So that said, yesterday we stretched our watercolor paper, and indeed it might look something like, well, like this. Whoa. Right? With the staples and everything. All right, so your paper is now dry and it should be flat. You'll notice that second hour is on the right and third hour is on the left. I rearranged some things because I had to, but that said. Okay, so I made a number of these papers that are cardstock that you are going to trace. And you'll notice that there's an X on one side. Okay, that is because we are making a card, and once you trace it, it has a mark where the halfway point is, and so that gets folded there. And so your card will open up something like this. It's going to be important that you don't, I mean, unless you really intend on painting it, but you're not going to paint on the back side of it. Okay, and so the setup is going to look something like this. All right, I'm going to get my laptop somewhat into position here, and I think you'll be able to follow along. All right. I am a little makeshift with all this, so hopefully this is going to make sense for you. All right, here we go. All right, can you see me? Okay, so yeah, you're just going to trace this out. I'm sorry about the shadow line. Can't help it right now. All right, so I'm tracing that out. Super easy. Yes, indeed. Oop, oop. There we go. And I'm making a mark where my halfway fold is. And then I'm going to cut that in half. All right, so at this point, I hope you can see, I'm going to make it, hopefully you can see that. I might make it a little darker real quick, just so you can see. Yours does not need to be this dark. All right, yeah. All right. And it's like this. It's like this. Okay, so on the left-hand side, I'm going to put an X, real light. I'm going to later erase it. Or if you can remember, that's just fine. Okay? All right. So at this point, we're going to set up our tangle. And our tangle is going to make the divides that we apply our technique into. So my suggestion is that you're going to have 2 exits on each side of the paper. Really easy. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, like 1, 2, 3. Oh, there's a bunch there. There's 3 there. There's 4 there. There's 3 there. That's going to give us plenty of sections to paint. Just want to do that. Yep. And then if I want to do some kind of point of focus, I can add some more shape. All right, that's my card. Boom, super easy. Okay, So yeah, so this is really only what, 5.5 by 8.5, this card. It's not a big painting. Okay. So you'll see, once you've done that, you can set the tracer aside. And you have 2 handouts. I suggest that you read through this one first. This is tips for color mixing and painting. And I've got a number of bullets here on the back. I've got some bullets that are specific to watercolor. You know, keep in mind that watercolor is a translucent medium. That means that you can see through it. You will see the paper because we see the paper through it. We don't, for white, we don't use white paint. We use the white of the paper. You're going to be painting from lighter to darker. That's different than acrylic. With acrylic, you paint from back to the front. With watercolor, you paint from the light to the dark. You're going to be using you have a set of watercolor, and you're going to see that inside, they all have brushes. And we're going to use the lid as our palette. Pretty easy. At your table, you should have a dirty water and a clean water. You should also have 1 sprayer per table. Now, I like to use the sprayer because it gives me a small amount of clean water coming in. So whenever I sit down, I just give my watercolor a little squirt. Doesn't have to be sopping, just a little squirt there. All right. And you can see just by adding water, we're going to get at our paint. Okay. So that is basically your setup. You're ready to paint now. So you'll continue to go through these points. I will go over it again, I promise. But that said, we're having fun with this, and I don't think I need to go over it all right now. The next thing, what I would like you to do is also watch this right here. We have the sampler watercolor technique list. And right now, if you just get started with maybe 2 or 3 techniques, that's awesome. Most of what I want you to learn is 1 of 4, part 1 of 4, which is the demos that are produced by this gal right here, Lorraine Watry. And if you just put Lorraine Watry into YouTube, she'll come up, and I would like for you to watch the first one. All right, but I'm going to paraphrase it right now. All right. So here we are. We're starting on our card. And again, just to understand that, watercolor must have water. And, the more water you use, the lighter the color will be. All right, I am going to do a flat wash. I might need to move my board a little bit. Okay. Got my paints right here. Okay. So I have made my brush really juicy. And I'm tilting my board. And when I paint, you'll see that you get what is called a watercolor bead. It's where the water dribbles down. And to create a flat wash, meaning that it doesn't it doesn't have any gradient. It looks like it's just really smooth. You're going to keep that paint moving. And so when I tilt my board, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Okay. When I tilt my board, you're going to get that watercolor bead down here, and you're going to keep that watercolor bead moving on your paper. Going back and forth. You get that little dribble. And you notice how I'm tilting my board. I'm going to fill that up. Ideally, it's going to end up being nice and smooth. All right, and I'm using the point of my brush. Now, this is different than, let's say, acrylic or tempera. A lot of times with acrylic or tempera, people kind of edge, you know, they go around the edge and then they fill on the inside. You don't do that with watercolor. You go from one side to the next. All right, you'll see here that I kind of got away from my bead, and I will have a darker saturated color right there. All right. On to the next. Now, if I wanted to paint this one, what's going to happen if I have wet next to wet? They bleed into each other. So if you want to have clean edges, you let it dry. So I think right now, for today, if you just practice flat washes, laying it down, playing with that watercolor bead, moving it around, using the very point to control. My hand is steady on the board. I'm not up here. I'm not using the base of my metal part of my frame. I'm just using the tips of that. Okay. All right. You see how it's all pooled there? Now, if I want to get that nice and flat, I'm going to squeeze out my brush. I just took the paint and I squoze it out. And I'm going to take that watercolor bead and I'm going to sop that up very carefully. And that should lay in our flat wash. All right, you can refer to Elaine Watry. She does a really good job. She does a really good demo. All right, just so you can see, if I were to go with wet next to wet, you see how that kind of bleeds into each other? I lose my control. If you want that, you can have that, but I don't think you're going to want that, not to begin with. I'm tilting my board so I can use that, again, that flat, get that flat wash, keeping that watercolor bead moving. Well, this one's turning out pretty good, and I'm going right to my edge. Now I touch there. I'm going to see if it's going to, hopefully it's dry enough. Now I have set up a hair dryer over on the counter. If you get impatient, you can use the hair dryer to dry your paint. To have crisp edges, you're going to want to have dried edges. Now, okay, so look here. There we go. Now, if I were to go and, like, if I'm painting really slowly, what's going to happen is that you're going to see all your brush strokes. I don't think you're going to want that. Try and keep this moving along. They say that watercolor is the hardest
painting medium. But if you get watercolor, man, you're going to have really good brush strokes. So I actually like to start that because people, I'm working a little dry right now, but people will, they'll have better brush control, right? You're learning technique here. Let's see, that's a little dry. That's gonna, let's see if I can, what happens when I do this. There it is, drinking down, working with that watercolor bead. All right, so we're going to end up putting techniques, different techniques on top of our flat wash. For crisp edges, you want to make sure that you're not going wet next to wet. All right. That is going to be our challenge for today, is to try and get as much done as we can. We'll just have fun. We're going to have fun with technique. I'll pick up where we left off on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, on Wednesday. Okay, I'm not moving in the room. Let me turn the lights back on. There we are. Okay. All right. Once you set a wash, don't mess with it till it's dry. That is super important. All right, that's the instruction for today. Let's turn this off. You can get started.